Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. I'm Ray.
And I'm Chris.
And today we're going to be going back to southeastern North Carolina, specifically Robeson County, North Carolina, in the 19th century, around the time of the American Civil War. And we're going to be looking at a gentleman who's well known in that area, a guy called Henry Berry Lowry, and the so-called Lowry Gang and the Lowry Wars. And Chris, you know, we think about this particular time in American history and this particular time in North Carolina history. You know, it wasn't easy for people who were living in the South, who were Native American, who were African American. It was not an easy time for people for those people in this area.
And one of the interesting things about history is that we always hear of a particular person or a particular event that resonates, something that causes us to stop and to say, oh, wow, that's a pretty interesting story. And I really think we've got a great story in line today as we talk about this really strong Native American rebel who's willing to stand up against a very corrupt, racist government who will be the embodiment of independence and courage and pride. And, you know, it's interesting that this individual we talk about today, he's got so many nicknames, if you will. He's known as Henry Bear. He's known as the Indian Robin Hood. But even some people would say that he was a symbolic founding father of the Lumbee people. And as you were saying, you know, the Native Americans during this time were really going through a difficult just way of life, because basically they were on their own, not being recognized by the government, not being able to receive the same advantages and other things that the government would provide to other American citizens. And so when you have this hero, if you will, who maybe does some things that not necessarily were hero worthy, but when we start talking about it, we'll find out that, you know, to every story, there's different interpretations. And so I really look forward in talking about how this founding father of the Lumbee people could probably be made into a really cool Netflix movie today.
Yeah, he certainly has a story. Of course, in the past, there has been a play that has been performed in Robeson County and at the University of North Carolina, Pembroke, called Strike at the Wind, which was a lot about Henry Berry Lowry and the Lowry family.
Yeah, and Ray, we need to kind of put our listeners kind of in the right context of what we're talking about. And, you know, if we look at 1861, we're at the beginning of the Civil War, and that's really kind of where our story's going to need to pick up today, because at this time period, you know, the Native Americans of Robeson County are really struggling. First of all, they're not allowed to own guns, and if you can't own a gun, you basically can't serve in the Army. And so since they can't serve in the Army, basically there's this local militia here in Robeson and southeastern North Carolina that was known as the Home Guard. And they were this local militia that was designed to protect the local area. And so what they decide to do is to use conscription with the natives, and they sent them down to Fort Fisher and actually helped them to build Fort Fisher, which many people might be familiar with, was a fort that was built to help protect the port city of Wilmington. And so as the war drags on, you've got Native Americans who are starting to flee and to run, and they are really experiencing a difficult time. And this is the moment in which Henry Berry Lowry, I guess at the age of 16 in 1864, really comes into being. But Ray, maybe introduce our listeners to kind of the beginnings of Henry Berry Lowry.
Yeah, Lowry was born in Robeson County, actually, which for listeners who are not familiar with the geography of southeastern North Carolina, Robeson County is in the southeastern part of the state, bordering on South Carolina, actually. He's born there in 1845. in the Hopewell community there in Robeson County. His father was somewhat successful farmer, had a farm there in Robeson County. Henry Lowry was actually one of 12 children. You heard that right, 12 children, as he grew up. And he comes of age at a time, like you said, when Lumbees and other Indians in southeastern North Carolina are being conscripted and taken down to work at Fort Fisher in a very dangerous environment. The work itself was dangerous, but also one of the things going on, if you know your history of Wilmington and southeastern North Carolina, is yellow fever was a big problem, of course, in that area at that time. So they're taking them down there into a dangerous job, into an environment where it was likely if they got bit by a mosquito, of course, they would get sick with yellow fever. And the Lowry Gang, as it sometimes is referred to, was originally formed to hide people, to help people who were hiding away from Confederate conscription. And remember, North Carolina is part of the Confederacy at this point, and Fort Fisher, as Chris said just a minute ago, was there in large part to protect the port city of Wilmington during the Civil War.
Yeah, and here we are moving through the Civil War, and Henry Lowry is not an old guy. I mean, in 1864, he's 16 years of age, and things really start to go bad for him in 1864 because allegedly he stole a hog from the plantation of a prominent white landholder in Robeson County. Now, if you don't know the rest of the story, you might say, oh my gosh, well, what was he doing? Why would you steal a hog? But Ray, as you mentioned, he was one of 12. And this is a large Native American family who is, even though dad was successful, it's still very hard at this time when you really have no benefits at all in North Carolina. They were having a hard time feeding the family. And so Henry saying, I got to do something. He, I guess, figured that this white landholder wouldn't miss a hog. And so he went and stole it, and the planter got mad. And so he called the Home Guard, that local North Carolina militia, to go and investigate, because they just believed that the Lowry family had done it. And it's interesting that plantation holder, that landholder, asked a guy whose name was James Brantley Harris to go and investigate. The problem with that is that Harris and the Lowry family had a lot of bad blood between each other. The Lowry family believed that Harris had earlier killed two of the Lowry relatives when they were trying to run away instead of being conscripted as slave labor. And so Harris goes and visits the Lowry household and says, hey, I'm checking in. I think you guys stole a hog, and we're trying to investigate. And what happens is, a few days later, after he had visited the Lowry household, Harris, the member of the local militia, was murdered. And they later found not only him being murdered, but later on they find the white planter whose hog had been stolen had also been murdered. And so immediately the authorities say, well, there's one group of people in mind, and that's got to be the Lowry boys or the Lowry gang. And so, Henry and his brothers basically got to find a way to hide out. And as they're hiding out, as you mentioned, they start finding ways to help other Native Americans escape the tumultuous and terrifying conditions that they were experiencing during this time.
Yeah, and as a result of the killing of James Barnes and James Brantley Harris, in response to the killing of these two people, the Home Guard, which we have to remember is aligned with the Confederacy, goes after the Lowry family. They arrest and convict Henry Lowry's father, Allen Lowry, and also one of his sons, William Lowry. And they are put on trial. Of course, they're convicted, probably something of a kangaroo court. And both of these men are executed there in Robeson County by the Home Guard in March of 1865. Barry Lowry, Henry Barry Lowry, who we're talking about, watched this happen. from a distance, sort of hiding in the bushes, watched the execution of his father from a distance. And he sort of becomes the face and the new leader of the Lowry band at this particular point in time. And of course, this is a group mostly made up of Native Americans of the Lumbee tribe, but there are also others. There's African Americans involved in it. There's a few white people involved with it as well. They go out on a robbery spree, and they commit robberies. But when we think of robberies, we're not talking about just robbing random people. They are going after wealthy white people, but they're also sort of atypical in their approach, in that they generally treat the people they are robbing with a great deal of respect. And if they don't need something they've taken, they return it, which is, I think, where you get a lot of this idea that he was sort of a Robin Hood type of figure, someone who is taking from the wealthy and giving to the poor. But at the same time, he's treating the people that he could rob, he's treating them with a level of respect, considering the fact they're being robbed, but he's treating them with a level of respect and avoiding robbing people who, just couldn't afford it.
Yeah. And, also it's important to understand he is still being chased. I mean, they haven't forgotten about him. And so the home guard extremely upset about the Lowry family. And after having killed, of course, his father and the brothers, you can really see that there is this conflict that is growing. And what's interesting is the home guard actually were able to catch Henry twice.
Yeah.
But before he could go to trial, the master of disguise, the one who's able to be an escape artist, he actually escapes from their clutches. And so he is become known as the swamp outlaw, if you will. And he's this larger than life figure, is mythological, if you will. And he's leading the home guard, on this wild goose chase throughout the swamps. And they're trying to catch him. And he's able to evade and to disappear into that mist of the swamp. And I found one story very interesting. They were talking about that they had actually were getting close to him and to the gang. And so Henry Lowry came up with the great idea that he actually dressed up and impersonated one of the home guard militia. So he actually pretended that he was part of the militia who was trying to find Henry Berry Lowry. And so he leads them down one path, which allows the gang to be able to go down another path. And so after this is going on over and over and over, local officials, the home militia, the home guard, they're embarrassed. And so the state of North Carolina, and during this time in 1866, 67, as we move forward, they put a bounty on him. And this bounty is $12,000. And that's a lot of money during this time to try to find this one guy. And they start to ramp up the pressure. And since they can't find him, and since he's been elusive, they move to the next step. And Ray, this is where I think it gets really interesting and kind of, I guess you could say, maybe borders on the unethical side of the government. In July of 1871, the sheriff decides, since he can't get Henry Lowry, that he's going to get the very next thing. And that is, he instructs his men, the sheriff instructs his men to arrest the wives of the well-known members of the gang. And one of those individuals that is arrested is Rhoda Strong, who is the wife to Henry Lowry. And the sheriff basically says, hey, once you turn yourself in, we'll let your wives go. So that's all you've got to do. Turn yourself in, we let your wives go, thinking that maybe Henry Lowry would say, okay, the fight's over. I care about my family. I want them to be gone. You can arrest me. But when Lowry learned about the hostages, he actually sent a note to the sheriff and he said, hey, look, you better release my wife and the other wives before Monday. And if you don't, this is what he said in that letter, quote, the bloodiest times will be here that ever was before. The life of every man will be in jeopardy, end quote. Well, You know what the sheriff did? He got smart. He released Rhoda and the other women. And once again, not only has the plan backfired, but here's Henry Berry Lowry, who continues to elude this large home guard militia. And that kind of takes us to 1872. And this is kind of when the story takes a dramatic turn, doesn't it, Ray?
Yeah, February of 1872, they have been, I guess you could say, at war with the Confederate supporters there in Robeson County, because in February of 1872, they raid, the Lowry gang opens a raid there in Robeson County in the city of Lumberton, in which they robbed the local sheriff of more than $28,000. There's this big, robbery that takes place. But what's significant about this particular robbery is not necessarily the amount of money that was taken or how it was taken or the size of the robbery. What's significant, Chris, is this was the last time publicly anybody ever heard from or saw Henry Berry Lowry again. And of course, Chris, as you know, what happened to Henry Berry Lowry? Well, we don't really know. We did an episode a few weeks ago on the Lost Colony. In many ways, the mystery of Henry Berry Lowry. What happened to him? Nobody really knows exactly what his fate was. There were, however, in the weeks and years after his death, there were some theories that emerged. One of the more popular theories was that he simply left the area with the assistance of a friend, General John Gorman. And this was a story that was told by his nephew, Reverend D.F. Lowry. His wife, Rhoda, actually asserted that he had successfully left the area as well, that he had escaped. There were some that asserted that he had actually faked his own death. There was a story that he had scattered rabbit brains and blood around a guy called Steve Lowry's home. And they had a dummy filled with straw to make it look like a body. And they took a coffin and carried it out into the swamps, of course, and he wasn't in it. It was just a distraction. Then there was those who say that he made a wooden coffin for himself and he sort of got out of town using that fake wooden coffin. One of the more disturbing theories that rose up was that he had accidentally killed himself. There was a story that's told by a guy called Orland Hayes Lowry. And he tells an account that Henry Berry Lowry was resting on a porch with a gun between his feet. And the barrel of the gun exploded, or both barrels of the gun exploded. Some say he was trying to clean the gun when it exploded and it went off, of course, blowing off his head and blowing out his brains. There are different theories as to exactly what happened to Henry Berry Lowry, whether he left the area through some escape plan, whether it be faking his own death, covering his identity with bandages, or just escaping in a fake wooden coffin, or whether he accidentally shot himself. We may never really know the truth as what happened to Henry Berry Lowry.
And I think the thing is, isn't this what makes history so fascinating? I mean, really, 2 + 2 is 4. That's what everybody talks about. It's what everybody knows. It's just fact. But what we have with Lowry is we don't know. You can look at him as a villain. You can look at him trying to do the right thing, but maybe using the wrong resources to do it. But at the end of the day, this guy's a folk hero. This guy is known all throughout Lumberton. And, as you mentioned, years ago, and I think it was in 1976, that they created an outdoor drama in Robeson County, which I think was called Strike at, it was called Strike at the Wind. And in 1976, that was the highest attended outdoor drama. I think I read somewhere like 17,000 people came during the summer of 1976 to watch this. But as part of that play, one of the things that was shared is this. This is kind of how that show, if you will, I'm not spoiling anything, but it says this about this Lumbee hero. Quote, upon this ground, Henry Berry Lowry fought for better or for worse. His time was a long time coming, but love is the second discovery of fire. And to each of you, we stretch forth our hand. May we, from this moment on, together affirm that there shall never be another time when to ask for the dignity of any man is to strike in vain at the wind, end quote. So, Ray, I think we find so much to be learned about Henry Bear or the Indian Robin Hood. And that is this, that he took his life and he was solely interested in helping others. And he went far and beyond to do just that. And just as Robin Hood has a history, and just as the story of the Civil War has a history, within those histories, there's also this common theme: good versus evil, right versus wrong.
This has been a great episode. I hope our listeners have enjoyed it. If you have comments, questions, you can always email us at historyyoushouldknow@gmail.com. That's history, the letter U, should know @gmail.com. You can find us on Spotify, Google Podcasts. My goodness, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, we're on Sounder FM. Chris, I think we're almost everywhere right now. And we encourage you to not just simply listen to this episode, but go back and listen to previous episodes and share these episodes with family and friends who you think might be interested. Until next time, I'm Ray.
I'm Chris.